By year 2030, so in only 8 years from now, 50% of the adults in the US will have obesity and 25% will have severe obesity. Now, is screen time responsible for the obesity epidemic? Completely? No, not really, not at all. But it is one of the major factors that is contributing to the foods that we are eating, the food marketing that we are exposed to, the food choices that we are making, and the sedentary behavior.
Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want. Well, hello, everybody. Today, we're talking about something a little bit different. Instead of food and health, which we often talk about, we're going to be talking about something else that you pick up with your hands, but it's not food, it's your devices. And our guest today is Dr. Nidhi Gupta. She was born and raised in India. And after 16 years of rigorous medical training with a focus on pediatric endocrinology, she was offered her dream job as an attending physician at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. In her practice, she saw the severe consequences of mobile device overuse by her patients, like obesity, sleep disorders, and mental health issues. Dr. Gupta realized that she was unable to truly help her patients until she empowered them with strategies to mitigate the addictive habits that come along with these devices that all of us, I think, know quite a bit about personally. And so Dr. Gupta launched Phreedom, Ungrip Devices, Grip Life. And Phreedom is spelled Phreedom. Over the last 2 years, Phreedom has become an international educational platform. It's making changes in a world addicted to smartphones, but unaware of the problems that these devices create. So get ready, because we're about to download a lot of information from Dr. Nidhi Gupta. Her resume, by the way, is 13 pages long. So she has a lot of knowledge to share with us. So welcome to the show, Dr. Nidhi Gupta.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Dotsie. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Tell us what got you interested in device overuse from the start.
About 70% of the conditions that I was seeing in my clinic had their roots in unhealthy lifestyles. Now, there are several different reasons for unhealthy lifestyles, but the one common factor that I saw in all of my patients and their parents was excessive use of wireless mobile devices, commonly known as smartphones or smart tablets or iPhones or iWatches. And there is a reason why I call them wireless mobile devices, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'll give you 2 examples. I saw a 5-year-old boy for evaluation of obesity. I did all endocrine testing known to the science of endocrinology, and nothing came back abnormal. 5-year-old Tyler weighed 97 pounds. Simply the effort of walking from the waiting room to the exam room made him short of breath. 17-year-old Riley, I diagnosed her with a bed sore. Why did I see her in clinic? Because she has type 1 diabetes. The reason for her bed sore was her addiction to video games and the fact that she was sedentary for most of the day in her bed after school playing video games. The bed sore had to be surgically removed. And because she has type 1 diabetes, the healing took forever. So until I addressed the root cause of why my patients are not able to achieve the health and well-being that I think they deserve to have, I was not really able to help them. There are very few medications in the field of pediatric endocrinology that I can prescribe to patients for obesity. There is really nothing to help them change their lifestyle other than counseling and coaching. I need time to do that. And I have now developed a practice where I can sit down and listen to the patient's story and coach them and help them achieve their lifestyle that they deserve, that they want. Now, it's not just about children, okay? These two examples, even though they are of my pediatric patients, it might make the listeners think that, okay, we generally talk about screen time in context of children. It spans everybody, children, professionals, parents, grandparents, everybody. We are seeing this phenomena affect everybody. I sometimes pause and think, as a society, have we come to a point of no return where our wireless mobile devices are concerned, where it's okay for us to check our phone while we are in the middle of a conversation?
Oh, I hate that. Right? And it's actually what I've noticed. I remember the very first time when I was at a dinner with a lot of people and somebody brought out their phone and checked their messages. And I was incensed. I thought it was so rude. And guess what? Now when somebody does that, it kind of annoys me, but I'm not as shocked and upset about the rudeness, because so we've very much changed. The social mores have changed as a society.
We have normalized it, and I don't think it's normal. I don't think it's normal for us to hide behind our phones when we get into an elevator and pretend to be busy on our phone just to avoid making eye contact. I don't think it's normal for us to pour our personal details and emotions on social media. I don't think it's normal for us to assess our own sense of belonging, our own sense of self-esteem by how many people commented and liked on our post and how many people follow us on social media. I don't think it's normal for us to use our devices as babysitters for kids. So through Phreedom, my message is that this is not normal. I refuse to accept this as my normal, the normal for my family, for my community, and for my country, and I'm here to change it.
Yeah. I'm going to take one step back. It is important to know, in case some people don't. I feel like I always have to look it up, and we've had endocrinologists on the show, but endocrinologists specialize in glands and the hormones they produce, which affect almost all of our body processes like blood pressure, metabolism, cholesterol, even hunger, thirst, body temperature. So you have this little boy, or he was a big boy, that can barely move. And you do all the tests and everything comes back okay. So what is this aha moment that you said, okay, let's look at the devices. Let's look at, what he's doing on a daily basis, because that kind of took a little bit of a left turn or a right turn, a left one from what you were definitely trained in and used to looking at as an endocrinologist.
Yes, it is a very different conversation. And I have to feel the pulse of the family that I am with. A lot of families can sometimes get offended when I start talking about lifestyle changes and screen time. So I have to be very careful. I have to help them understand that I'm on their team and I have their best interest at my heart. And this is something that is in the blind spot of a lot of parents. Screen time and the associated sedentary behavior is not something that we as a society have started recognizing as much. There are a lot of guidelines from American Academy of Pediatrics, Canadian Academy of Pediatrics about how much screen time is okay for children of different ages. There has been a lot of research. Now, if we talk about the data that has been published as far as the screen time and its impact on health, there are 4 major areas of health that are affected by excessive screen time and excessive use of wireless mobile devices. And those are the 4 areas that I highlight for families like these. Number 1, obesity. Number 2, sleep disorders. Number 3, mental health issues. And number 4, distracted driving. For obesity, we now have clear research. There is no doubt about it that spending more than 2 to 3 hours per day of screen-based leisure time, so screen-based leisure time, I'm not counting schoolwork or office or care, it's screen-based leisure time, our discretionary time, that doubles the odds of overweight. Very interestingly, there was a recent study published in New England Journal of Medicine that projected that by year 2030, so in only 8 years from now, 50% of the adults in the US will have obesity and 25% will have severe obesity. Now, is screen time responsible for the obesity epidemic? Completely? No, not really, not at all. But it is one of the major factors that is contributing to the foods that we are eating, the food marketing that we are exposed to, the food choices that we are making, and the sedentary behavior. For sleep, go ahead.
No, the obesity. I was just hiking with a PhD friend of mine that is diet, disease, and exercise professor, and he shared with me that the obesity rate in the United States in 1990, which for the three of us feels like yesterday, was 11.1%, and we are at 47.2.
Wow.
Last year.
I'd be curious to know if it accelerated after like 2005, 2007, when the smartphone came around. Dr. Gupta, are you able to be more specific about how that obesity curve what it looks like?
So the obesity curve did exaggerate quite a bit over the last 10 years. So Apple's first smartphone was launched in 2007, 2009. And a lot of research that we have available is in children and their use of devices and screens. Prior to 2009, most of the research focused on video games and TV and desktop computers. But in the last 10 years, most of the research has now shifted its attention to handheld devices. There are numerous papers that are targeting children. I wouldn't say targeting children, in which children are the participants. But now there are more and more research studies that are now looking at the behavior of the parents, the relationship that parents share with their devices, because believe it or not, our children watch what we do. And if we are engaged with our devices 24/7, our children would be inclined to believe that it is normal, that it is okay for them to do that too. If they watch their parents checking their Snapchat or Instagram while driving, it's hard for teenagers to think that it's not the right thing to do.
Can you give us any statistics on device use among, well, you specialize in young people, but statistics on, so we can kind of get an idea of how often people are in front of screens each day, either for leisure or work or school?
So children more than 14 years to 17 years of age spend about 5 to 7 hours of screen time every day outside of schoolwork. So
outside of school?
Outside of schoolwork. So can you imagine, how does that leave any time for anything else to be done? They are in school for about 8 hours and then 5 to 7 hours outside of schoolwork on their devices. Research also shows that the maximum or the highest use of screen was seen in children around the ages of 14 to 15 years, because that is also the age that is associated with least impulse control, with most poor choices. And then the third data suggests that children who received or who started using their smartphone before the age of 13 years are most likely to have mental health issues going forward compared to those who were introduced to a smartphone with internet access after age 13 years.
Wow. It blows me away. Dotsie, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know. It's just, it's staggering. And it makes me go, oh gosh, it's terrible to say, but I just have one of those again, like, I'm so glad I don't have a child like that. Cause that just, it's like your whole life is just poof, as you're staring at your phone, right? You can see the trajectory. So I guess then it's interesting to talk about is if it is a true addiction, like we get addicted to food and drugs. And I know how I got connected with you was through my cousin, Tara Heaton, who has been on the podcast. People have to go back a bit for that one, who does the talk to the brain work. And she talks a lot about dopamine and endorphins and oxytocin and the dopamine rush that comes with each new bit of information, in this case, right from our cell phone. And chasing the hit, if you will, that instant gratification that the kiddos get, right? If they get a like or a share or whatever it is. And then it's never enough, right? Because if you have 1, you want 7. If you have 7, you want 20. So is there research that shows this it is as addictive as drugs and, let's say, processed sugar?
You put it very correctly, Dotsy. Absolutely correct. Everything that you said falls into place when it comes to wireless mobile devices. Now, unfortunately, we do not have recent research because this is a new upcoming topic. We do not have specific research that can show us that dopamine spikes every time there is a notification on our device. But we have plenty of research over the last 30 years that shows similar behavior patterns when it comes to video gaming, internet addiction, desktop computer use, and gambling. Now, there is something called DSM-5 criteria, which I know you're familiar with. Smartphone addiction and cell phone addiction has not yet made it to being recognized as a DSM-5 criteria. For behavior addiction, they have only included gambling as an official diagnosis, as an official DSM-5 criteria, not even video gaming or internet addiction. Now, what is behavior addiction? Behavior addiction has a lot of definitions, but at the bottom line of all of those definitions lies this one single feature: unsuccessful attempts to curb the behavior. Unsuccessful attempts to curb the behavior, even though the user knows the short-term and long-term harmful consequences of that behavior. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is making us do this. Dopamine is addictive. Dopamine makes us want to check our devices again and again. It reinforces that feeling. So every time there is a ding, a buzz, a shine, a cue, a notification, there is a spike of dopamine in our brain. That dopamine leads to craving. Now, over time, human brain has become so conditioned in responding to that craving that we robotically reach out for our device. Our hands reach out for our device. That is our subconscious response. And then we find a reward in our device, a reward in the form of a new message, a new email, a new like, a new comment, or anything. It could be anything, something new, something novel, a new news, anything novelty. Our brain is after novelty. Our brain is after stimulation. Every time we have a reward, our brain is looking for the next cue. Every time there is a cue, we are seeking a new reward. I call this the trigger loop of wireless mobile devices. And this concept is derived from the book. I highly recommend reading that book, The Atomic Habits by James Clear. He talks about habit loop. I call it the trigger loop of wireless mobile devices, which has 4 components, which will be important when we talk about how to solve this problem. The step number 1 is cue, the cue of notification. Step number 2 is craving, which is mediated by the dopamine. Step number 3 is our response, where we reach for our device. And number 4 is reward. Now, things have become to this point, Dotsy and Alexandra, that even if there is no notification on our phone, we always check. We still check. We refuse to believe that there is no notification. Nobody has sent me an email for the last 10 minutes. What? I have no text messages for last 15 minutes. How is that possible? I posted this thing on social media this morning and nobody has liked it yet. Where is everybody? And when we start associating that feeling with a sense of loss of belonging, we might feel a little bit sad. We might feel a little depressed. Now, do you think the teenagers with their still developing 13, 14-year-old brains, are they able to process the fact that what they are seeing on social media is not necessarily real? A lot of it is superfluous. Are they able to disconnect the real from the unreal and move on, or do they get affected by everything that they see on social media?
Well, let's talk about that. Let's stop here and let me ask, how has it affected brains to be so focused on this one little device that constantly gives new information? Is there any are there any statistics on that? How do they differ to the brain of mine, I'm 59 years old? I didn't start using a device until 2/3 into my life.
So our brain is getting these activations through dopamine, these short bursts of dopamine, which are motivating. These short bursts last for only a few seconds. The dopamine level rises up and it goes away quickly. But our brain loves that feeling of heightened pleasure. It's very similar to a person who has behavior addiction or who has drug addiction. And I'm saying this because people who have done research in behavior medicine have now started extrapolating a lot of those findings into cell phone addiction. So whether you are exposed to devices at a younger age, middle age, or older age, there is potential for addiction. For children, it's really important because the executive functioning of the brain develops in the first 5 to 7 years of life. And then there is massive spurt in their executive functioning skills between the ages of 11 to 15 years. Now, what are these executive functioning skills? Time management, organization, impulse control, emotional regulation. The dopamine spikes, the constant stimulation through dopamine can mess with the formation of prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is responsible for our cue reactivity, that is responsible for our impulse control, for our executive functioning. If our teenagers have constantly been stimulated to dopamine in the first 10 to 15 years of their life, there can be structural and functional changes in the prefrontal cortex that are irreversible.
When you say structural, tell us about that. Because let me just give you an example. Is that I have a friend who's been living in LA for the last, 10 years or so. And because he came when there was already Waze and all those map things, he doesn't know his way around his own hometown. He doesn't have his brain hasn't been used to sort of look at the world spatially. Whereas when I came 40 years ago, I had a map, so I could see what the city of LA looks as a whole. And I'm wondering how that affects the brain when we don't look, especially with mapping, but in other ways too, we don't look at the big picture so much. And we're so focused on one small object or place to tell us what to do next.
Exactly, Alexandra. I tell my patients about skills. If you don't use it, you lose it. It's similar to muscle deconditioning. If you don't exercise for a while, you become deconditioned. Brain is no different. Brain is a muscle. You've got to keep using each different compartment of the brain to keep it active. There is a different compartment of the brain that gives us our direction sense. There is another part that gives us our calculation and math sense. Another one that helps us keep things organized and helps us do time management. If we outsource a lot of these skills to our devices, like you said, GPS, calculator, clock, and reminders, calendars, it's very easy to start losing those skills over time. Now, the novelty that the internet offers is so exciting and so stimulating, and it is a very strong positive reinforcement. That is what makes our connection with our devices very, very, very strong.
What is it that the constant notifications from technology, I understand the dopamine hit, and I guess so you start to get the dinging and then you want more dinging. But what I don't understand why the dinging feels positive. And I'm an emotional empath. And so I'm extremely sensitive to sounds, light, crowds, arguing. Like there's very specific things that I have a lot of sensitivity to. So I cannot listen to the pinging. I have all notifications turned off. My phone is on silent all the time. Sometimes I miss important phone calls. I cannot stand for my phone to make any noises. So why are those sounds negative for some people, but positive for others? Is it just people that aren't sensitive to sound? The notifications mean someone likes them. So that's it right there.
I think I'm just like you, Dotsie. I have all notifications on my phone silenced because it bothers me, it annoys me, it distracts me. And so I only have my phone calls on ringers. So if somebody needs to reach me right away for something urgent or emergent, they know to call me. Email and messages are not the way to reach somebody for an urgent question. Everything else is not urgent and can wait at least a day or two. So going back to your question about how different people respond to dopamine differently. Well, at one point, our understanding was that dopamine mediates pleasure, right? There's a difference between pleasure and joy. Pleasure is short-term, short-lasting. Joy is something that stays with us, something that we hold on to, right? Now we know that dopamine mediates desire or wanting something rather than liking something. So there is a difference between wanting something and liking something. And that's where the difference between finding pleasure and finding joy, the pleasure that the online world offers us versus the joy that the offline world offers us. That's where we have to find the balance. We have to find so much joy, the long-lasting joy in our real life, that the pleasure of the online world does not keep us pulled away. Now we have to train to do this. We have to practice this. It doesn't happen in a day. This will take practice, like yoga, like meditation. And like I said, there is so much positive reinforcement from our devices, and our connection with them is so strong. In order to break that connection, our intention has to be equally strong so that we can decide who we are going to let win in this battle of pleasure versus joy.
You know, I too have my notifications on my phone turned off because I don't want to be disrupted just because I'm doing things that are in the real life. Right. But I get stressed by the Bing, and if I do hear something, or I see something come across my screen that I feel stressed that it's not a pleasure thing. But it is a drive to deal with it, that I might be missing something. And so I think there's that fear of missing out for young kids. You mentioned obesity and gave some very clear answers, examples of how device use can lead to obesity. Tell us about the mental impacts on young people and how it will translate into them in adulthood.
So daily screen time more than 2 hours per day was associated with increased risk of anxiety, depression, and psychopathological symptoms. It's really hard to believe, but there has been an increase in death by suicide by over 30% between the years of 2010 and 2016. Research also shows that while we as individuals think that we are socializing using wireless mobile devices, in theory, there is a trend towards individualization in real life. Now, there are some social media platforms, and I'm not going to name them, that they have been the subject of a research study. They have been designated as toxic for the mental health of teenagers, especially girls. Now, how is wireless mobile device overuse and behavior health interconnected? What has social media, or WMD, as I call them, wireless mobile devices, got to do with behavior health? They're kind of
and can you define toxic in this sense? Because what does that mean, toxic for young girls?
Toxic for young girls in the sense that it promotes something called upward social comparison. Upward social comparison is a phenomenon where the user is comparing their own life with that of everybody else on social media. Everybody else's perfect vacation, their perfect children, their perfect marriages, their perfect life, their perfect school scores, versus your own life seems boring, mundane, routine, so structured, and so disciplined. It's hard for teenagers to understand that people only post a snapshot of their life on social media. They do not post anything unpleasant on social media. So it is irrational for them to assume that this is everybody else's normal life, and that their own life compared to the people on social media is boring. And that's where the issues about body image, issues with eating disorders, neurological disorders such as tics. There has been an increasing incidence of functional tics in teenage girls that neurologists have seen in the last 5 years, inspired by content on some social media platforms.
No, wait, how does a tick get you? Is that a physical thing that you're affected somehow by the light or the movement? Or what's the link?
There are people out there who genuinely have tics, okay? And they have now formed a community on TikTok where they have posted videos of themselves having tics, but they're having genuine symptoms. They're not faking it. And by posting it on TikTok, they're looking for validity. They're looking for a sense of belonging, that what is happening to them is not something to be made fun of. Now, what is the repercussion of that? The girls who do not have those symptoms are, by watching this so often and so frequently, and by seeing the validation that these real patients are having, these girls are starting to have functional tics just by watching them.
What this shows is that the copycat syndrome, the what you talked about with girls wanting to have the lives of the people who are
right
on Instagram. So it's just a perfect example, but such a one that we would never think of, that people, but we do see, Dotsie, a lot of the girls trying to get thinner and thinner and thinner when they see thin people. And there's like a competition online about who can get the thinnest, which is the same that happens in real life among friend sets, actually, but it's just expanded and magnified online, right, Dr. Gupta?
Yes. So going back to the question of the tics, what we know from the limited evidence that we have so far is that there is something called, like you said, Alexandra, the copycat syndrome, where teenagers who do not have the symptoms of tic, just by watching other people who genuinely have those symptoms, are now starting to develop those symptoms. And neurologists are starting to see more and more patients showing up in their clinic with functional tics. There is also another example that was on one other social media platform. It was called the Blackout Challenge, where the people were challenging each other to put a bag on their head and literally choke themselves and experience the feeling of blackout. And it is unfortunate and it is sad, but children actually died in the process of doing the Blackout Challenge.
But can I just push back a little bit here, is that yes, that is that's a tragedy, but that has happened also on schoolyard playgrounds too, on a smaller level, with people bullying a child, looking up to the most popular, biggest kid who happens to probably be mean, or, and want to emulate them. So that does happen.
But I think therein lies the problem, right? Is the magnitude. So many more kids are dying and trying this than four. It's 400,000 now is the problem with social media.
The scale of this problem has become so enormous because social media is so easily available to every single child without supervision of their parents or teachers. When things happen on the school ground, the magnitude was a little bit limited and contained. Things were not happening behind closed doors. Nowadays, as from what parents tell me, teenagers come home from school, they go up to their room, and then they don't show their faces for the rest of the evening because they find so much validity and so much interest and so much novelty in what is happening in social media, in their online life, what is happening with their online lives, that they don't really have much interest in their offline friends anymore. So what all is social media able to teach our teenagers and adolescents is a little bit scary. There are algorithms. We all know about the algorithms that work behind the scenes in social media. If a child has watched one particular link, then the algorithm thinks that that child likes to watch that. And the algorithm is going to continue to show that child more content related to that topic. And it takes a huge amount of willpower not to click on those clickbaits. The people who are designing this content know exactly how our brain works. They know exactly what will make the children and adults click on random news articles, random promotional feeds, marketing items. That is where the tech companies who are operating behind the scene That's where they're making a lot of money. They have a very tight grip on our time and on our attention. And we've got to get our time and attention back, and the mental health of our children.
Is this is happening all around the world, right? Or is the United States and North America, do we use devices more than anyone? Or are there other countries that might not even be countries where you might want to escape even more from your real life? Do they use devices more?
The total population of the world, Alexandra, is 7.9 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know the total number of smartphone users? It's 6.6 billion.
Wow.
Which means that about 85% of the population of the world today has access to a smartphone. And this number is going to grow rapidly in the next 5 to 10 years. The only population or the only part of the world that does not have access to smartphone is probably the one that does not have access to electricity, because they need electricity to charge their phones. So that is the extent. There have been research studies, not just from the United States, not just from North America. There are smartphone compulsion tests. There are smartphone addiction scales from China, from Japan, from Italy, Turkey, India, Jordan, Dubai, Pakistan, Canada, London, Ireland, all over the world. So it's not a matter of developed versus developing countries. Technology has transcended all boundaries of professions, of cultures, of races, countries, continents, oceans. It's pervasive. It's everyone, everywhere.
And I'm curious because we've heard a lot about that, maybe even just having earbuds or the Bluetooth all around you is unhealthy. And I know that for me, I can't put a laptop directly on my thighs. Otherwise, my legs start to ache right away. I have to put something between, like a pillow. I actually have a special thing that I put on, but that I put my laptop up on. And if my legs are hurting, I'm wondering what this is doing to our brains or our eyesight or other physical things. Can you share about that?
The most research that we have so far focuses on obesity, sleep disorders, and mental health disorders. But in the last 5 years, we now have a few papers that are starting to get published. They talk about cell phone dermatitis. So holding the cell phone close to your face, exposing your skin to the metal. Now, remember, this study was published almost 6 or 7 years ago. And I'm not sure if the metal that is used in the body of the cell phone has changed since then, if this is still true. But there has been study documenting cell phone dermatitis. There is evidence for dry eyes. There is evidence for computer vision syndrome. Over the last 2 years, there was a boom in myopia, especially in children, maybe because of the remote learning, the fact that they had their schools online and they were on their devices for most of the time. We have evidence for impaired postural balance, cervical neck muscle issues. We have neck disability, psoriatic arthritis, worsening of psoriatic arthritis, pain in the neck, pain in the elbows, and pain in the shoulders. And there is a term for that. It's called iPhone-itis. So iPhone related inflammation of the wrist, of the thumb, of the elbow, and of the shoulder. So there are so many physical manifestations of excessive use of wireless mobile devices besides just obesity, sleep, and mental health.
Wow.
Wow. Dr. G, I remember when we were chatting on the phone and talking about you coming on the podcast, and you talked about evidence that is connecting cell phone usage, device usage with early onset of puberty. And that blew me away. Here at Switch for Good, we know the evidence connected to early puberty and dairy, but that makes sense. It's an onslaught of sex hormones in the food itself. Talk to us about this early onset in relation to devices.
The early onset of puberty has several different etiologies. Besides endocrine issues, lifestyle and obesity has become a significant factor in the last decade or so. What we know is that the age of onset of puberty in both girls and boys over the last 15 to 20 years has shifted by at least 6 months to a year towards the younger side. Nothing else has changed other than environment. So food, activity, and lifestyle. So how is early onset puberty associated with excessive screen time? It boils down to the lifestyle choices, the obesity, the intake of processed food, because that is the food marketing that a lot of parents and children are exposed to. And for obesity, reduced activity, reduced green time. I call it green time, more screen time, and just being sedentary, losing track of time. We sit down to scroll for 15, 20 minutes, but before we know, it's been 45 minutes to an hour. So all of those factors combined result or might result in obesity, which can then increase the chances for early onset of puberty.
I see. Ugh. What about the social? You mentioned it, touched on it briefly, but I know lots of younger people who don't like to speak on the phone. They're uncomfortable with that kind of dialogue. And then I've been with my husband for 27 years, well before Dotsie, you've been with Kirk almost as long. And there were not the mobile devices. So we did not woo each other over text.
Right.
I have to say, I'm a little horrified when people start, dating and all they've done is text. They've never even spoken to each other. And I think, where's the nuance? Where's the, it feels to me, and I feel like such an old person saying but they're missing so much. And maybe this is exactly what my grandmother did when she looked at, us watching TV and speaking on the phone. Right. She thought, well, you guys should be out playing with each other and visiting your neighbors door to door, right? So tell us how it's affecting socially our society or these young people as they grow up.
Social media promotes more time online. And in that process, what it is doing is it is helping us escape from face-to-face interactions. It is helping us displace face-to-face interactions. Face-to-face interactions have a lot more positive impact than what we have with the online interactions. We like to think that technology has brought us closer. I like to think that too. Most of my family is in India, and I stay in contact with them through WhatsApp and through FaceTime. But at some point, we have to draw the limits. We have to draw the boundary where technology is really helping us connect versus it is helping us disconnect with what really matters. It is helping us disconnect with real life. So social media blunts the positive interactions. Even if we are meeting with people face to face and we are picking out our device, that is the end of positive impact of that conversation. So we have to be mindful that technology helps us bring the word closer, stay connected closer to a little bit, but after a certain point, we've got to put it down and move on with real life.
Yeah.
That's true. Even when people are together, they often interrupt their togetherness with the phone. So their interaction is so much different. Yeah. Wow.
Moving to solutions, because you mentioned them earlier, and it's like, oh my gosh, now I'm just kind of like this in my chair, just like, oh gosh, what are we going to do? You had 4 components of solutions, and so how can cell phones and devices aren't going to go away, and it does feel like there's a convenience aspect to them, there's an emergency aspect to them, right? And a lot of parents will say, I've got to get my 10-year-old a phone in case there's emergency, which lately, especially with school shootings, that makes loads of sense. So we're not getting rid of it. So how can people start to achieve, and children, because that's really what you're looking at, a life technology balance?
Right. There are 2 tools, Dotsie, 2 tools that are empowering, that are practical, and that do not require us to go back to a flip phone, that do not require us to delete our social media accounts. Okay. But they require patience and practice and mindfulness. So tool number 1, I mentioned about escape displace. I've given it the name of a theory. I call it the theory of escape displays. And my favorite example for this one is that of a butter knife. We use butter knife to cut butter and spread butter. Once we are done with that, we put it down and we move on. We do not walk around the house with a butter knife in our hand because we treat butter knife as a tool, right? Butter knife is a tool. I encourage people to use their devices as tools. Every time there is an urge to check the device, I encourage people to pause and think. Take a few seconds. Think, what is it that I'm picking my device for? Is there something that I need to do in my device at this time? Or I'm picking it up just to escape from something? What do we escape from? We escape from boredom. We escape from stress. We escape from anxiety. We have outsourced our coping strategies to the virtual world. So when we are going to pick our device the next time, can we pause and think, what am I escaping from? What am I displacing? Should I be exercising at this time? Should I be putting my phone down and actually going to sleep? Should I be putting it down and actually focusing on that research paper or the proposal that I have to write? Should I be focusing on the homework that I need to do? So once we have processed that for a microsecond, let's take a pause. A big deep breath, let go of the judgment. Remember, you are not alone. Nobody is alone. We are all in this struggle together. So there is no judgment here. After we have processed that, let go of the judgment. And then if there was really something that we needed to do with the device, well, then sure, go ahead, pick it up and do whatever it is that you needed to do. But if not, put it back down and engage with the task or the person that you were escaping from. So I encourage people to convert the theory of escape, displace to engage, replace. Let's replace those essential activities back into our daily living because they are very, 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 very necessary for our health and well-being. Sleeping, exercise, media-free family time, taking care of our work, being efficient, being productive, time management, all of that is important, and we cannot let our devices distract us and escape from those activities. So that is tool number one.
And that brings up something actually is to actually not have the device at all in your vicinity when you're spending quality time with someone you love. I just think that's so important because the dings can somehow, especially if it's somebody who is in your family, whom you sort of might take for granted, the dopamine rush isn't as high as a new ding because, but to have that quality time means so much. Do you give any prescriptive things like devices go down or no devices in the kitchen at dinner or devices don't look at your device for an hour after getting up? There's I've heard some of these suggestions.
Mm-hmm. I wish they would work. They are really good in theory, but considering the dopamine rush and our tendency to seek pleasure, a lot of these recommendations would seem restrictive to people. You know how we start adopting a new diet and we are excited about it and we do it for a few days. And after that, we are like, sorry, I can't keep up with this. And then we end up having an episode of binge eating that ruins all the progress that we have made. So being restrictive around our devices, I'm not sure if that is going to work. We have to take...
But if you don't look at it as being restrictive, because you're actually gaining something else. But, I understand I'm not a 14-year-old and their whole life is on this device. So it's very... And they don't want to hang around and have quality time with their parents. So maybe it does feel restrictive. But for us adults, we adults, maybe we'll look into our, partner's eyes, our parents' eyes, our siblings' eyes, and get a new appreciation of them if we're actually with them.
Yeah. There are ways to do that, Alexandra. What I do in my home is I have a tiny little basket that I put in a corner in the kitchen because that's where most of us are in the evening. So my phone is on ringer for phone calls and it is sitting face down in that basket. And it is an opaque basket. It's not a transparent basket because if it was transparent, every time my screen glows with a notification, I would still see it. So it's got to be an opaque basket. That's where my phone stays for the entire evening. And when my husband gets home from work, that's where his phone goes. So making time for no devices while with the family, at least for 60 to 90 minutes every day during weekdays and longer during weekend, is something that most families can easily work towards. And it's going to change their perspective in the sense that after 90 minutes, they might actually not want to go back and pick their devices. The same applies for meals. No devices on the table during mealtime for children and for adults. And this applies to meals at home and outside of home. Something else that I tell them, buy two things, okay? There are two simple, cheap things that I want people to buy, two things that we have completely given up on. Number one, an alarm clock. Number two, a wristwatch.
Yes. I did that exact thing. I did that. I take big long walks with my dog, and I was always taking my phone because it had the time, and maybe I have to get back for a meeting, right? And it was like, and then I was checking things and I just stopped. I said, no more. I do not want this POS with me on my walks. And I bought a $25 freestyle watch, does nothing else but just tell me the time. So I get home for the meeting and I can look, I experience nature now. Oh, I didn't know that tree was there. Because what am I staring at my phone answering some ridiculous email? It just, oh yeah. So you've got to have a bit of self-control, right? Like, okay, this isn't working. Move to what works. The problem is the time. Get a wristwatch. Okay, right. I'm done. Diatribe over. But that was huge for me. So if it can help anyone else.
Take out some of the functionalities from our smartphones and start going back to some old-fashioned tools that we used to survive with. We did okay with those 20 years back. Why are we so dependent on a cell phone to wake us every morning? When we use our cell phone as an alarm clock, we are using it as an excuse that, oh, okay, I use my cell phone as an alarm clock. I've got to keep it on my bedside. Are you kidding me? You can get $10, a simple, cheap alarm clock on Amazon that will be shipped to you by tomorrow. It doesn't need to have any fancy lights. It doesn't need to have radio to wake you up in the morning. It just needs to set an alarm. And like you said, for the wristwatch. So the other tool was to break the habit loop, where we've got to try and eliminate the clues by turning off non-essential notifications. And there are several ways to do that. The step number 2 in that habit loop is to damp the craving, the dopamine craving. That is hard to do because that takes time and practice and intention. Step number 3 was the response. How do we weaken the response? We've got to try and keep our devices out of hand's reach for about 30 minutes interval so that we can work with focus. We can put it away in a desk drawer and lock it up and put the key away. We can put the device in our bag's zipper pocket and not look at it for 30 minutes. We will be okay. If we are able to do this for 30 minutes, then maybe consider increasing that interval to 60 minutes. Quite honestly, working without interruption, without checking social media for 60 minutes is not asking for too much. And the 4th step is make the reward go away from the devices. Make the devices boring and unenticing and unappealing. And this is the one that most people fall out of their chairs when I tell them, delete social media applications from your phones.
Oh, and put them what? Just on the computer? So
yes,
you have
absolutely.
to go to them instead of them coming to you.
Yes, exactly. The apps are designed to be addictive. There is extra money, extra funds poured into making the apps addictive. Each notification that shows up as a red icon on the device grabs our attention. So deleting the apps, not asking to delete social media. I use social media for my own marketing and branding and getting my message across to people. But I use it on a browser. If you want to use it through your phone, go through your browser, type in facebook.com, and then enter your username and password, and then log in. How often do you think you will do that?
That's old school. Listen to you, Dr. G. Actually put in your username and password. It's so true, though. Yeah.
The more hurdles we create to things which are time consuming and attention grabbing, the less likely we are to do that. Do not let your device remember your username and passwords for social media. If you can't remember username and passwords for social media, well, then it's probably not even worth it.
Yeah, that's a good one. It also helps your brain. Are there any other things that you advise to help us stop being owned by our devices. And you also mentioned in the very beginning that there was a reason that you call it a mobile device, is that what your focus is. Can you elaborate on that too?
Yes, I call these devices wireless mobile devices, WMD. The most commonly known abbreviation or the full form of WMD is weapons of mass destruction. Okay, I like to call them weapons of mass distraction. Now, what are wireless mobile devices? Any device that is portable and uses wireless internet to send or receive information. So this includes smartphones, smartwatches, tablets, iPads, and laptops. Why do I not call them smartwatches? I think we give them way too much respect by calling them smart. So I like to put technology back in its place and call it exactly what it is, WMD, wireless mobile device.
Got it. Very good. Very good. So any other suggestions you have in a world where we're owned by our devices?
It's a tough word. It's a tough digitalized word. It would be irrational to suggest complete avoidance of wireless mobile devices. That's not the point. The point is not to throw our smartphones out the window. I don't think I'll be able to do that myself. But the point is moderation, balance, and real life engagement. We have to try and disrupt the trigger loop of wireless mobile devices. I hope I was able to help the listeners understand the habit loop, the trigger loop of wireless mobile device addiction, help them understand the theory of escape displays. And I hope that some of the practical strategies that I shared will help them convert that to engage and replace. There are many more resources on our website, phreedom.net. Please feel free to visit those for more details.
And remember, Phreedom is spelled with a PH. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm going to think of you because I notice that nowadays I feel naked, and I'm not as addicted to my phone, and I'm not much on social media either, but I feel unsafe if I leave the house without my device. Just because I'm not connected in that way to my husband or AAA or a map or something. So, and it's so weird because, 20 years ago, we didn't have these and we were fine, by the way, got home fine. So a lot has changed. So we appreciate you reminding us of how capable we are as humans, and we actually don't need these devices as much as we think we do.
Absolutely. Life technology balance is possible. We are in the grip of FOMO, the fear of missing out, that does not let us go for a walk without our device, that does not let us take a short trip to the grocery store without our device. This is not normal, and we have to stop accepting it as normal for our sake and for the sake of our future generations.
Yeah, well said.
Thank you so much for being on the Switch for Good podcast. And
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Hey, folks. Okay. Back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.